You know the scene, right? You walk into a reptile expo or a local pet store, and there they are, Sulcata tortoises. I mean, they literally look like living, breathing miniature dinosaurs, and honestly, it's no surprise they're so incredibly popular. But here's the thing, they are also deeply, deeply misunderstood. Bringing one of these little guys home is a completely different universe than just admiring them through a glass tack. So today, we're unpacking the Krawlo research guide on sulcata care, and we're going to look at exactly what it takes to actually care for these amazing creatures the right way. And trust me on this, the reality of owning one of these giants, it's probably going to blow your mind.
Okay, let's dive into this. This right here is the absolute biggest trap for new reptile owners. It's the reality check. You start with this hatchling, right? It's palm-sized, it's adorable, and it frankly looks like the absolute perfect low-maintenance pet to just keep chilling in your living room. But that tiny, delicate creature, it is going to turn into a massive adult that can tip the scales at up to 200 pounds. And we aren't just talking about a heavy animal here, we are talking about an absolute powerhouse. The sheer volume and mass of a full-grown sulcata is just staggering. Honestly, they are basically living bulldozers. And look, it's not just their physical size that's massive, it's the timeline. 100. That is how many years these animals can live. We're looking at an expected lifespan of anywhere from 70 to well over 100 years. So this isn't just a pet, this is a multi-generational commitment. When you bring a baby sulcata home, you are quite literally making a decision that will likely outlive you. You actually have to sit down and think about who's going to care for this giant animal decades down the road. I mean, it completely redefines what it means to take on a pet, doesn't it? To really wrap our heads around why they get so big and live so long, we need to know exactly what species we're dealing with here. The scientific name is Centrochelys sulcata, though you'll usually hear them called the African spurred tortoise. They originate from the Sahel region of Africa and, well, here is the real kicker. They are the third largest tortoise species in the entire world. That global size ranking really matters for anyone thinking about getting one, because you are definitely not bringing home a typical garden turtle. You're bringing home a top-tier global giant, and that fact alone completely dictates how they have to be housed. This timeline maps out what I like to call the Great Migration. Just look at how fast this progression happens. At year 1, your hatchling is, perfectly fine in a temporary 4x2-foot indoor tub or a standard tortoise table. But by year 3, they are already completely outgrowing basically any standard indoor enclosure you can buy at a store. And by year 5, keeping them inside is practically impossible. They're going to need a massive outdoor pen. We're talking a minimum of 100 to over 200 square feet, and honestly, the more space, the better. You're transitioning from a little corner of your bedroom to needing dedicated acreage in your backyard in just a few short years. It's wild. And when you do finally build that outdoor enclosure, you can't just throw up a basic chain-length fence and call it a day. The perimeter walls literally must be buried at least 12 inches deep into the ground. Why? Because their strength is absolutely astonishing. Sulcatas are powerful, highly motivated diggers. If they decide they want to get to the other side of a barrier, they will literally just try to dig right under it or even through it. An adult sulcata can easily knock over your heavy patio furniture and quite literally dig straight through drywall if they're ever let loose indoors. So you're building an enclosure to contain a very determined, very, very strong animal. And this brilliantly illustrates the next huge challenge. To support all that massive growth, you kind of have to become an expert in extreme desert engineering right there in your backyard. Remember, they're from the Sahel region of Africa. That means hot, intense sun, and you have to replicate that perfectly. Their basking spot needs to be absolutely scorching, between 100 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The ambient daytime temperature needs to sit between 85 and 95 degrees. At night, it can't drop below 60. And if you live in a climate where it gets below 50 degrees, you are required to build them a dedicated, actively heated shelter. Natural sunlight is obviously best when they're outdoors, but you have to artificially create an African summer whenever the weather turns cold. So the crucial point is that heat isn't the only environmental factor you have to manage. Moisture is just as critical. You have to keep it dry. Sulcatas come from the fringes of the Sahara Desert. They require a maximum humidity of 30 to 50%, and honestly, ideally even lower than that. If you keep a sulcata in a highly humid or damp environment, they are incredibly prone to severe respiratory infections and chronic shell problems. A bone-dry environment isn't just a suggestion. It's absolutely necessary to keep your tortoise alive and thriving.
To actually achieve that perfect dry environment, you need the right setup. Step 1 is your substrate. Indoors, you need a good 6 to 12 inches of a dry sand and soil mix. Play sand and dry topsoil works great, just to accommodate their natural instinct to burrow. Outdoors, you have to allow for deep, natural burrowing too. Step 2 is the lighting. If they're indoors or locked in their heated shelter during the winter, you absolutely must install a high-output T5HO 10.0 UVB lamp. This isn't an optional upgrade. Strong, intense UVB is an absolute necessity to mimic that African sun so they can actually process the nutrients in their food.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we actually fuel a 200-pound giant. You'd think an animal this massive needs a heavy, calorie-dense diet, right? Well, actually, scratch that. It's the exact opposite. They survive on a strict, extremely high-fiber, low-protein grazing diet. It breaks down kind of like a pie chart. 75 to 80% of everything they eat should be just plain grasses and hay, like timothy or orchard grass. About 20% can be safe wheats, think dandelions or clover. And only a tiny 5% fraction of their diet is made up of dark leafy greens like endive or collards. They are strict grazers. Let's move to and see how this builds into their overall health protocol. Here we're breaking down the safe staples versus what you must absolutely completely avoid. Grasses, hay, and dark leafy greens, that's your foundation. You'll also need to supplement with calcium powder about 3 times a week, toss in a weekly multivitamin, and just leave a cuddle bone out so they have free choice calcium. Now for the danger zones, never ever give them animal protein, and definitely no commercial dog or cat food. No way. Also, skip regular fruit because it's just way too high in sugar for their systems. Feeding them high protein or high sugar directly leads to catastrophic health issues like kidney disease.
And look, if that strict desert environment and that low-protein diet aren't perfectly maintained, the health consequences are incredibly severe. Pyramiding is super common. This is that unnatural raised, deformed growth of their shell scutes you sometimes see, and it's caused directly by excess protein, low humidity, or just a bad diet overall. Then there's metabolic bone disease from a lack of proper UVB lighting and calcium, which literally destroys their skeletal structure. If their setup is too cold or damp, they'll develop respiratory infections, and if they're sitting in chronic moisture, shell rot. But here's the good news. Every single one of these common health issues is completely, 100% preventable with the right husbandry.
And that brings us to the single most important takeaway from the Krawlo Research Guide. It's a reality that really, truly needs to sink in. Quote, "This is not a beginner tortoise." It's one of the most frequently sold reptiles in the hobby, largely because, let's face it, the hatchlings are so cheap and so incredibly adorable, but tragically, it is also one of the most frequently rehomed animals out there. When you buy a sulcata, you are taking on a massive responsibility. You're taking on an animal that requires heavy-duty landscaping, incredibly precise temperature controls, and a very strict dietary regimen.
So I have to ask you, are you truly ready for a 100-year commitment to a 200-pound backyard dinosaur? Because if you have the space, if you have the resources and the dedication, sulcatas are undeniably incredibly rewarding and fascinating animals to keep. But you have to go in prepared. If you want to learn more and see the exact step-by-step breakdown of the gear, the outdoor pen designs, and the dietary schedules, you've got to check out the full research-backed Sulcata Care Guide over on the Krawlo blog. Before you bring any pet into your home, you always have to ask yourself, are you adapting their environment to your life, or are you willing to adapt your life to theirs? Definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.